The salt spray hit my face as our longship crested another wave, and I knew the gods had cursed us. My name is Bjorn Ironside, and was, a jarl of the Northmen, leading 50 warriors in search of new lands to conquer. We sailed west from our homeland, following rumors of islands rich with plunder. But the storm that took us lasted 3 days and 3 nights, and when it finally broke, we found ourselves beneath a sky the wrong color, approaching shores that gleamed with metals we had never seen. You think Vikings were savage. You think our raids were brutal. We knew nothing of true savagery until we stepped onto the world the locals called Valdris Prime, an Imperial hive world in the Segmentum Obscurus. This is the story of how 50 Norse warriors encountered the Imperium of man. This is how we learned what real monsters looked like. Chapter 1. Landfall on an alien shore. The shore was wrong. That was the first thing I noticed as our longship, the Stormbringer, approached land. Back home, beaches meant sand or pebbles, grass-covered cliffs, maybe driftwood scattered by storms. This shore was metal. Great rusted sheets of it jutted from the water like the ribs of dead giants. Structures that might have been buildings or ships rose in the distance, their shapes angular and harsh in a way no human hand should have crafted. The sky above was a sickly yellow-grey, and the air smelled of sulfur and burning metal. Bjorn, my sworn brother Erica, called from the prow, his voice tight with unease. This is not Vinland. This is not anywhere the Skalds have sung of. He was right. In my 32 winters, I had sailed from the northern ice to the Mediterranean shores, had raided monasteries in Britain, and traded in the markets of Constantinople. I knew the world and its coasts. This was nowhere I recognized. The crew was silent, which was unusual for Norse warriors. 50 of us had survived the storm. 50 of the hardest men from my clan. Veterans of countless raids. Men who feared neither death nor Christian priests, nor the dark forests of the unconquered lands. But this place made even hardened warriors nervous. We need fresh water, I decided, pushing down my own unease. And to find out where the storm has taken us, prepare to land, weapons ready. We beached the longship on one of the massive metal sheets, the sound of wood scraping against rusted iron making everyone wince. The metal was old, I realized. Incredibly old. Pitted and corroded in patterns that suggested centuries of exposure, but the structures beyond showed no sign of being abandoned. I led 20 men inland, leaving Erica with the ship and the rest of our warriors. We moved in formation, shields overlapping, spears ready, exactly as we would approaching a hostile Saxon village. The beach extended for perhaps 200 paces before giving way to what looked like a forest made of metal. Massive pillars, some collapsed, some still standing, rose like iron trees. Cables and chains hung between them like vines. And everywhere, were symbols carved or painted onto surfaces. Double-headed birds, skulls, text in letters I had never seen. Bjorn, one of my warriors whispered, pointing. Movement. I followed his gesture and saw them. People. Or things shaped like people. They moved wrong, too stiff, too mechanical. As they came closer, I realized with growing horror that they were people, but broken somehow. Their faces were slack and expressionless. Their bodies showed crude modifications, metal plates bolted to flesh, cables running into arms and necks, one eye replaced with a glowing red lens in several of them. They wore rags that might have once been clothing, and they shuffled toward us in a loose group, perhaps 15 of them. They made sounds, not words, but rhythmic chanting in a language that hurt to hear. Unauthorized presence, unregistered biological entities, report for processing, report for processing, report for processing. The words meant nothing to me, but the tone was wrong, hollow, dead. Shield wall, I commanded, and my men snapped into formation instantly. Whatever these things were, they didn't look armed. But I hadn't survived this long by taking chances. The shambling people things continued approaching. One reached out toward us, with a hand that was more metal than flesh, cables writhing beneath torn skin. "Halt!" I shouted in Norse, then in the Saxon tongue, then in the Greek I had learned trading. None of it registered. They kept coming. Processing required. Integration mandatory. Compliance. I threw my axe. The blade caught the lead thing in the chest, and it went down without a sound, twitching as sparks flew from severed cables. The others didn't react, just kept shuffling forward over their fallen companion. "They're thralls," Erica said, his voice tight. "Some kind of thralls. But who would do this to people?" I had seen many horrors in my years of raiding. I had seen villages put to the torch, had participated in blood eagle executions of enemies, had watched men die screaming in battle, but there was something uniquely terrible about these shambling things. The casual brutality of whatever had been done to them, the complete absence of humanity in their movements. We fight, I decided. There was no other option. We couldn't retreat to the ship with these things potentially following, and they clearly weren't going to stop approaching. The battle, if it could be called that, was brief and disturbing. The things didn't fight back, didn't defend themselves. They just tried to grab us with their modified limbs, still chanting about processing and compliance. We cut them down efficiently, but there was no joy in it. This wasn't combat. This was slaughter of things that had once been people. When the last one fell, we stood in silence, looking at the bodies that sparked and leaked fluids that were not quite blood. "This is a cursed place," one of my warriors said, making signs against evil. "We should leave, return to the ship and sail away." I wanted to agree. Every instinct said this place was wrong, dangerous, cursed by gods we didn't know. But I had responsibilities. We needed fresh water. We needed to know where we were, whether there was a way home. And we needed to understand what had happened to those people. Because if there were more of them, if there were others who did that to people, we needed to know what we faced. We go deeper, I decided, but carefully, and we stay together. We advanced into the metal forest, moving between the massive pillars. The ground beneath our feet was a mixture of metal grating and something that looked like stone but felt wrong when you stepped on it. Too smooth, too uniform. We had been walking for perhaps an hour when we heard the sound. A deep, rhythmic pounding, like a giant's heartbeat. And beneath it, other sounds. Machinery. Voices chanting in unison. The clang of metal on metal. We crested a rise, a pile of rubble that had once been something larger, and saw what lay beyond. A city. But unlike any city I had ever imagined. It rose into the diseased sky, a mountain of metal and stone that seemed to have been built by madmen. Structures piled on structures, connected by bridges and cables, lit by harsh lights that burned without flame. Smoke poured from thousands of chimneys. And everywhere, people moved in vast organized masses, like ants serving a massive colony. "Odin preserve us," Erica whispered. "What is this place?" I had no answer. The city, if it was a city, was larger than any settlement I had heard of. Larger than Constantinople, which the Greeks claimed was the greatest city in the world. This was a mountain of habitation, and it teemed with more people than I could count. And rising from the center of it all, dominating everything, was a structure that could only be a temple. It was massive, angular, covered in those same double-headed bird symbols we had seen on the beach. Smaller buildings clustered around it like children around a mother. "We need to understand this," I said, though part of me wanted to run back to the ship and sail until we found familiar waters or died trying. "We need to know what we're dealing with." We descended from the rubble pile and approached the outskirts of the city. Here the structures were smaller but still larger than any longhouse I had known. They were built of materials I couldn't identify. Not quite stone, not quite metal, but something in between. People moved through the streets, but they were different from the shambling things we had killed. These moved purposefully, wore what looked like uniforms. Rough grey coveralls, most of them. Their faces were gaunt, malnourished, but their eyes showed awareness that the others had lacked. They saw us approaching, 20 Norse warriors in mail and leather, carrying shields and weapons, clearly foreign, and their reactions were strange. Some simply looked away, as if we were beneath notice. Others showed fear, but it wasn't directed at us specifically. It was a general fear. a constant background terror that I recognized from slaves and conquered peoples. These people were afraid of everything. One man, thin, hunched, missing several teeth, stared at us with wide eyes. I approached him carefully, my axe sheathed, hands open to show I meant no immediate harm. "Where are we?" I asked in Norse, then Saxon, then Greek. He just stared, uncomprehending. Then he spoke, and though I didn't know the words, the tone was clear: confusion, fear, and something like awe. "Non-standard equipment, unauthorized personnel. Are you arbitrators? Are you from off-world? Please, I'm meeting my quota. I'm loyal to the Emperor. Peace," I said. The word meaningless to him, but the gesture. Hands open, no weapon drawn, universal. "We mean no harm. We're lost. We need help." He backed away, shaking his head, then turned and fled into the narrow passages between buildings. "They fear us," Erica observed, "but not as enemies, as something else." He was right. The reaction wasn't the hatred of Saxons seeing raiders, or the defiance of warriors facing enemies. It was something more complicated. These people were so thoroughly broken by whatever governed them that even strange armed foreigners weren't their primary concern. We moved deeper into the outskirts, drawing more stairs but no direct confrontation. The city around us was overwhelming in its scale and its misery. People lived in conditions worse than slaves, crammed into spaces barely large enough to lie down, dressed in rags, showing signs of malnutrition and disease. But they worked, constantly. We passed vast manufactories where thousands of people labored at tasks I couldn't understand, creating objects I couldn't identify. The noise was incredible: machinery pounding, voices chanting work rhythms, overseers shouting orders in that harsh, ugly language. And everywhere, those symbols: the double-headed bird, skulls, text that looked like it should be meaningful but remained incomprehensible. We were standing in what seemed to be a market square, though what was being traded I couldn't identify, when we heard the sound that would change everything. Marching. Not the chaotic movement of a mob, but precise, rhythmic, military marching. A formation rounded the corner, and I felt my warriors tense. These were soldiers, real soldiers, perhaps 50 of them, moving in perfect lockstep, wearing armor that gleamed despite the grime of the city. They carried weapons that looked like crossbows but wrong, metal contraptions that hummed with a sound like angry wasps. They saw us. The formation halted with perfect precision, and their leader, identifiable by slightly more elaborate armor, stepped forward. He spoke, the words incomprehensible, but the tone unmistakable. Authority, command, demand for explanation. I stepped forward, hand on my axe but not drawing it, and tried to communicate through gesture. We were lost. We meant no harm. We needed help. The leader's response was to raise his hand, and 50 of those strange crossbows pointed directly at us. I realized, in that moment, that we had made a terrible mistake. Whatever this place was, whoever these people were, they were not like anyone we had encountered before, and we were very, very far from home. Chapter 2. First Contact with Imperial Law. The weapons the soldiers carried didn't fire arrows. I learned that when one of my warriors, young Halvard, barely 20 winters and too brave for his own good, made a sudden movement toward his sword, there was a sound like thunder compressed into a single instant, and Halvard's chest exploded. Not pierced, not punctured, exploded. The impact threw him backward 3 paces, and he was dead before he hit the ground, a hole the size of my fist through his torso. "Shields!" I roared, and my men responded instantly, overlapping their round shields in the wall formation that had saved us in 100 battles. More thunder. The shields shattered like kindling. Wood that had turned aside Saxon swords and Pictish spears simply disintegrated under whatever force these weapons unleashed. 3 more of my warriors went down, their bodies torn apart by impacts that no armor could stop. "Yield!" I shouted in Norse, then Saxon, then Greek, throwing down my axe and raising my hands. "We yield!" My remaining warriors followed my lead. those who weren't dead or screaming from wounds that no healer could treat. We stood there, hands raised, surrounded by our dead, facing soldiers who regarded us with the cold efficiency of men who killed as casually as I might swat a fly. The leader approached, his weapon still leveled at my chest. He spoke again, that harsh, ugly language, and when I didn't respond, he made a gesture. 2 soldiers grabbed me, forced me to my knees, and snapped metal restraints around my wrists. Not rope or chains, but solid bands of metal that clicked shut and wouldn't budge no matter how I pulled. The same was done to my surviving warriors. 16 of us left from the 20 who had entered the city, 4 dead in less than a minute, killed by weapons that made our swords and axes look like children's toys. We were marched through the streets, prisoners now, while the population watched with the same blank fear they showed everything. No sympathy, no curiosity, just that constant background terror that seemed to define their existence. The building we were brought to was massive, built of the same grey material as everything else. Inside was a vast chamber, stark and brutal in its functionality. The walls were covered in more of those symbols, the double-headed bird prominent among them. They separated us, putting each man in what I initially thought was a cage, but realized was something else. A small room with metal walls, a single harsh light, and no furniture except a bench. They threw me in, the door sealed with a sound like metal grinding on metal, and I was alone. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours, certainly. Long enough for my initial adrenaline to fade, for the reality of our situation to settle like cold iron in my gut. We had sailed into something beyond our understanding. These people, whoever they were, possessed powers that made them as far above us as we were above the sheep we herded. The door opened. A man entered. Not one of the soldiers, but someone else. Older, wearing a black coat covered in more symbols. He carried a device that looked like a book made of metal, and when he spoke, his voice was cold and precise. The words were still incomprehensible, but he pressed a button on his metal book, and suddenly, impossibly, I understood him. "You are in violation of approximately 400 Imperial laws," he said, in a voice that now spoke perfect Norse, though with an accent that placed it nowhere I knew. Unauthorized planetary arrival, failure to report to administratum authorities, possession of prohibited primitive weapons, assault on Imperial servitors, unlawful congregation, and most seriously, complete absence of Imperial identification or registration. I stared at him, trying to process what was happening. The metal book, some kind of magic, some impossible device, was translating his words. And those words suggested an authority structure, a legal system, a civilization so vast and complex, it made the Byzantine Empire look like a tribal council. "I don't understand," I said carefully in Norse, and heard my words come back in that other language from the device. "We are lost. A storm took our ship. We meant no offense." The man in black made notes on his metal book with a stylus that left glowing marks. "Ignorance of Imperial law is not a valid defense. Your origin is irrelevant. You have arrived on an Imperial world without authorization. You have killed Imperial property. Those servitors were registered and valuable. The penalty for these crimes is death or indentured servitude, depending on the Arbites' assessment of your potential utility. Death or slavery. After everything, after sailing across unknown waters, after surviving the storm, after witnessing the horrors of this metal city, we faced death or slavery. We are free men," I said, feeling anger kindle despite the fear. "Warriors, we will not be slaves." The man looked at me with something that might have been pity or might have been clinical interest. "You misunderstand. You have no rights here. You are unregistered biological entities on an Imperial world. You exist only because we have not yet determined whether killing you is more efficient than utilizing you. Your concepts of freedom are irrelevant. Only the Emperor's law matters." Who is this Emperor? What gives him authority over us? The man's expression changed. For the first time, I saw real emotion. Not anger, but something closer to shock. He made a gesture I didn't understand, touching his head and chest in some ritualistic pattern. You don't know the God Emperor? His voice was strained. You're not just unregistered. You're ignorant of the most basic facts of Imperial truth. This complicates matters significantly. He stood abruptly, backing away from me as if I had suddenly become dangerous in a new way. He spoke into another device at his belt, rapid words I didn't catch. Then he left, the door sealing behind him. I sat in silence, trying to understand. We had stumbled into a civilization that worshipped an emperor as a god. A civilization so powerful that its common soldiers carried weapons that made our finest warriors helpless. A civilization so vast that a city larger than Constantinople was apparently just one settlement among countless others. And we, 50 Norse warriors in a single longship, were less than insects to them. We were problems to be categorized, potential resources to be exploited or eliminated, not people with any inherent value or rights. Hours passed, or maybe days. It was impossible to tell in that windowless cell with its eternal harsh light. I dozed fitfully, woke to the same metal walls, dozed again. When the door finally opened, a different group entered. These were soldiers, but their armor was more elaborate, and they moved with the confidence of elite warriors. Their leader was a massive man, his face a network of scars, one eye replaced with a glowing red lens like the shambling people things we had killed on the beach. He studied me in silence, then spoke. The translation device rendered his words in Norse. I am Arbitrator Sergeant Matthias Cole. I have reviewed your case. You and your men are primitives from some uncontacted tribal culture, yes? There was no point in lying. We are Northmen, Vikings. We come from... I paused, realizing I had no idea how to explain our homeland to someone who clearly didn't share our maps or knowledge. From across the Western Sea, a storm brought us here. Arbitrator Cole nodded slowly. We've analyzed your ship, your weapons, your language patterns. You're using pre-industrial technology. Iron Age, approximately. Possibly recovered from some lost human colony that regressed after isolation, or something stranger. He leaned closer, his natural eye and mechanical eye both focusing on me with uncomfortable intensity. Here's your situation. You've arrived on Valdris Prime, an Imperial hive world. The Imperium of man spans the galaxy. More worlds than you have words for. More people than you can conceive of. Every human in the galaxy lives under the God Emperor's law. Except, apparently, you. We didn't know, I said. How could we know? We've never heard of any of this. That's the only reason you're still alive, Cole said bluntly. Normally, armed, unauthorized individuals would be executed immediately. But your complete ignorance suggests you might be from an uncontacted world, which means you're potentially valuable, either as curiosities for the administratum to study, or as recruits if you prove useful. Recruits? For what? The Imperial Guard, the Emperor's armies. If you can fight, and preliminary reports suggest you can handle yourselves in melee combat, then you could serve. The alternative is penal servitude in the manufactorums until you die, which given the conditions won't take long. I thought of my men, locked in cells like mine. Thought of the 4 who had died in seconds because we didn't understand the weapons facing us. Thought of our longship beached on that metal shore, and the impossible distance between here and home. If we serve in these armies, I said carefully, would we fight? Would we be warriors or slaves with weapons? Cole actually smiled, though it wasn't a pleasant expression. Oh, you'd fight. The Imperium is always at war. Xenos threats, chaos incursions, heretic rebellions. There's always something that needs killing. Guardsmen have short life expectancies, but they die as free men serving the Emperor, not as slaves in manufactorums. Free men. The term was probably generous given what I'd seen of this civilization, but it was better than slavery. And fighting. Fighting I understood. Fighting was what Vikings did. I need to speak with my men, I said. This decision affects all of us. You misunderstand, Cole said flatly. You don't get to decide. I'm offering you the choice between dying as a warrior or dying as a slave. But you're going to die serving the Imperium either way. That's not negotiable. The only question is whether you'll die with a weapon in your hand or a tool." The casual certainty in his voice was chilling. We had no leverage, no power, no options except those they granted us. We were completely at their mercy. And mercy was apparently not something these people valued highly. "Then we choose to fight," I said, because what else could I say? "We are warriors. We will serve in your armies." Cole nodded as if he had expected no other answer. "Good. You and your surviving men will be processed into the Imperial Guard. You'll receive basic training in Imperial tactics and weapons. You'll learn to speak proper Gothic. You'll be taught the fundamentals of Imperial faith, and then you'll be deployed to wherever the Emperor's wars require bodies." He stood, preparing to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Your old life is over. Your old gods, your old culture, your old identity. All of that belongs to the past. You are Imperial Guardsmen now. You serve the Emperor. That is all you are, all you will ever be. If you can accept that, you might survive long enough to make your service meaningful. If you can't," he shrugged, "then you'll die badly and be forgotten." The door sealed behind him, and I was alone again, with my thoughts and the terrible knowledge of what we had become. We were no longer Vikings, no longer free men sailing in search of plunder and glory. We were property now. Resources for an empire so vast it made our entire world, everything we had ever known, look like a single grain of sand on an infinite beach, and we would serve it until we died, because there was no other choice. The psychological torture had already begun. Chapter 3. Transformation into Imperial Guardsmen. They moved us the next day. All 16 survivors were shackled together and marched through the city to what they called a training facility. The walk took hours, and it gave us our first real view of the hive city in daylight, or what passed for daylight here. The sky was still that sickly yellow-grey, and I realized it wasn't actually sky at all. We were beneath something, layers of city built on top of older city, rising up until it blocked out whatever real sky existed above. The sun was artificial lights, massive banks of them, creating a harsh illumination that hurt to look at directly. The people we passed still showed that same broken quality. Malnourished, afraid, working constantly at tasks that seemed designed to crush the spirit as thoroughly as they crushed the body. I saw children, some younger than 10 winters, laboring in the manufactorums alongside adults, their small hands operating machinery that looked like it could tear them apart with a single mistake. This was a civilization, yes, powerful beyond anything I had imagined, but it was also a hell that made our worst Viking raids look like mercy. The training facility was a massive compound, surrounded by walls twice the height of a man. Guards stood at intervals, their weapons always ready, their eyes constantly scanning. We were processed through a checkpoint, our metal restraints finally removed and assigned to a barracks. The room was long and narrow, with metal bunks stacked 3 high along both walls. Perhaps 100 men were already there. Imperial Guardsmen in training, their faces showing the same mix of fear and determination I saw in my own warriors. Our arrival caused a stir. We looked different, taller on average than most of the locals, with lighter skin and hair, wearing the remains of our Norse clothing. One of the locals, a young man with a shaved head and a scar across his jaw, approached me cautiously. "You're the primitives," he said in that harsh language, translated by a device one of the guards wore. "The ones who arrived in a wooden boat. Is it true you don't know the Emperor?" "We knew no Emperor before yesterday," I answered honestly. "We came from across the sea. Were Vikings." "Vikings," he repeated, testing the word. "What's that?" "Raiders, warriors, sailors. We live by strength and courage, by raids and by trade. We worship—" I paused, remembering Arbitrator Cole's warning. "We worshipped different gods." The young man's eyes widened. "You're heathens, true heathens, not just sinners. He made that same gesture the man in black had made, touching head and chest. The Emperor's mercy must be infinite if he allows you to live. I didn't respond. What could I say? That their Emperor meant nothing to me. That I served now only because the alternative was death. Better to stay silent and learn. The training began the next morning. We were woken before what passed for dawn by harsh bells and shouting voices. Forced to stand in formation in a vast courtyard while instructors, veterans with scars and augmetic replacements, inspected us like cattle at market. "You are nothing!" the lead instructor bellowed in that harsh language, translated for our benefit. "You are less than nothing. You are meat that breathes, resources to be spent in the Emperor's service. The only question is whether you'll be spent efficiently or wasted." It reminded me, painfully, of my own training as a young warrior. The same brutality, the same attempt to break down individuals and rebuild them as soldiers. But this was more thorough, more systematic, more completely designed to erase who we had been. They started with language. We were given translation devices to wear, small metal boxes that clipped to our belts, and somehow made the Gothic language comprehensible. But we were also required to learn it properly, spending hours each day repeating phrases, learning grammar, practicing until the harsh sounds became familiar. Alongside language came indoctrination. We were taught about the God Emperor, a being who had supposedly created the Imperium 10,000 years ago, who sat on a throne of gold on a planet called Terra, who protected humanity from horrors beyond comprehension. We were shown images of him, a massive figure in golden armor, impossibly powerful, radiating authority. The other recruits prayed to him constantly, before meals, before sleep, before training exercises. They seemed to genuinely believe he watched them, cared about them, would reward their service in death, if not in life. My warriors and I went through the motions. We repeated the prayers, made the gestures, learned the catechisms. But privately, among ourselves, when we were sure no one was listening, we discussed what we really thought. "This emperor is like Christ to the Christians," Erica said one night, his voice barely a whisper. "A God who demands worship and promises salvation. But unlike Christ's mercy, this God only offers service and death. At least the Christians allowed you to find peace in the afterlife," another warrior, Thorvald, added bitterly. "These Imperials promise only more service. Even in death, they say, souls serve the Emperor." I hushed them, afraid of being overheard. The penalty for heresy, which seemed to mean anything the Imperium disapproved of, was horrific. We had witnessed one execution already, a recruit who had questioned whether the Emperor was truly divine. They burned him alive in the courtyard while forcing everyone to watch, and then executed 3 of his bunkmates for not reporting his heretical thoughts. This was not a civilization that tolerated dissent. The weapons training was both humbling and exhilarating. We were given laser guns, the same weapons that had killed my warriors so easily. They were simple in design but devastating in effect. Point, pull the trigger, watch your target disappear in a flash of superheated light that burned through flesh and bone. "These are the Emperor's mercy," the instructor told us. "Quick death for his enemies. You will learn to use them as extensions of your own will. You will learn to kill efficiently, without hesitation, without mercy of your own." We practiced for hours each day, firing at targets, learning to maintain the weapons, understanding their limitations. The other recruits struggled with the recoil and noise. But for warriors who had trained with bows and thrown axes, the laser gun was almost too easy. Point and shoot. No accounting for wind or distance beyond the most basic calculations. No strength required to draw a string or throw a blade. It was a weapon for killing in vast numbers, quickly and impersonally. Exactly what the Imperium seemed to value. But we also learned melee combat in the Imperial style. They tried to teach us to fight with bayonets fixed to our laser guns, using prescribed techniques that emphasized formation fighting and mutual support. It was similar to our shield wall tactics, but more rigid, less adaptable. During one training session, the instructor, a scarred veteran named Sergeant Dawn, decided to demonstrate proper bayonet technique by sparring with recruits. He called for volunteers and, getting none, pointed at me. "You, primitive, show us how your people fight." They gave me a training weapon, a laser gun with a rubber bayonet attachment, and faced me against Sergeant Dawn. The other recruits formed a circle, watching with interest. Dawn attacked with perfect Imperial technique. Thrust, parry, thrust, exactly as the manual prescribed. I responded with Viking combat instincts, treating the laser gun like a short spear. I feinted high, went low, swept his legs, and had the rubber bayonet at his throat before he could recover. The courtyard went silent. Sergeant Dawn looked up at me from the ground, surprise evident on his scarred face. Then he laughed, a genuine sound of respect. "Emperor's teeth! The primitive knows how to fight. Where did you learn that?" 100 raids, I answered honestly. Against Saxons, Franks, Picts, Moors. Against anyone who had something worth taking. Dawn stood, brushing dust from his uniform. Raider tactics. Aggressive, unpredictable, designed for small unit combat. Not Imperial doctrine, but effective. He addressed the watching recruits. "This is what actual combat experience looks like. Most of you will die in your first engagement because you've never truly fought. This primitive and his kind might actually survive because they already know how to kill and keep killing." After that demonstration, our status in the training facility changed. We were still outsiders, still primitives who didn't fully understand Imperial culture. But we were also recognized as experienced fighters, which counted for something even here. Other recruits started asking us questions. How did we fight in formation? How did we maintain morale in combat? How did we deal with fear? I answered as honestly as I could, though I had to translate concepts that didn't fit Imperial thinking. "We fight for each other," I explained, "for our brothers beside us, for honor and for glory. We believe a good death in battle ensures a place in Valhalla, where warriors feast and fight forever." "Like the Emperor's side," one recruit said, making the connection. "Where the faithful serve him eternally." "Perhaps," I agreed, though privately I doubted it. Valhalla was supposed to be reward for a life of courage. The Emperor's service seemed to promise only more service, an eternity of fighting without rest or reward. But I was learning that survival in this civilization required adaptability, learning its language and customs, understanding its power structures, becoming what they needed us to be while maintaining some core of self. My warriors were adapting too, each in their own way. Erica took to the laser guns with enthusiasm, becoming one of the best shots in our group. Thorvald focused on understanding Imperial hierarchy, learning who had power and how to navigate the chain of command. Others specialized in various skills, heavy weapons, demolitions, field medicine using Imperial techniques. We were transforming, becoming Imperial guardsmen not just in name, but in function. And with each day of training, each prayer we recited, each Imperial custom we adopted, we lost a little more of what we had been. The Vikings were dying. Slowly, systematically, eroded by immersion in a culture so vast and powerful that resistance was impossible. We could maintain our language among ourselves, could privately remember our gods, could tell stories of our homeland in the rare moments of rest. But we were becoming something new, something neither fully Viking nor fully Imperial, but somewhere between. Warriors who remembered freedom but lived in service, who worshipped old gods but prayed to new ones, who carried the memories of longships and raids but fought in formations and followed orders. 3 months into training, they gave us our uniforms. Grey-green fatigues, body armor made of materials I didn't recognize, helmets that protected head and face while limiting visibility. We looked like every other guardsman now, anonymous, interchangeable, part of the vast machine of Imperial warfare. I caught my reflection in a polished surface and barely recognized myself. The man looking back was thinner, harder, aged beyond his actual years by constant stress and insufficient food. His eyes held a wariness I hadn't seen before, the look of someone who had learned that the world was more terrible than he had ever imagined. We were graduating soon, the instructors said. Would be assigned to a regiment and deployed to whatever war zone needed bodies. Would finally see actual combat in the Emperor's service. I should have been eager. I was a warrior. Combat was what I did, what I was good at. But I felt only a hollow dread, because I understood now what we were being trained for. Not glorious battle where courage and skill determined outcomes. Not raids where a fast ship and quick thinking could ensure survival. But grinding attrition warfare where soldiers were ammunition, spent in vast numbers to achieve objectives that served purposes we would never understand. We were being prepared to die. Not immediately. Not pointlessly. The Imperium did value efficiency, but inevitably. The training was designed to make us last long enough to be useful, to kill enough enemies that our deaths represented positive return on the Imperium's investment in our training and equipment. That was what serving the Imperium meant. That was what we had become. Viking warriors transformed into Imperial guardsmen. Free men transformed into property. People with history and culture transformed into resources to be expended. And there was nothing we could do about it except accept the transformation and try to survive as long as possible, in the hope that somehow, someday, there might be a way home. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. We were here forever, or until we died, which, in the Imperium, amounted to the same thing. Chapter 4. First Deployment. The transport ship was called the Indomitable Will, and it was larger than any structure I had ever seen. Our entire village could have fit in its cargo hold with room to spare. It hung in orbit above Valdris Prime, and we were ferried up to it in smaller craft that screamed through the atmosphere with a violence that left half my warriors vomiting into provided bags. Space. We were in actual space, looking down at the world we had just left. I pressed my face to a viewport and saw Valdris Prime spread below, a grey-brown sphere wrapped in clouds of industrial pollution, dotted with lights from hive cities that glowed like infected wounds. "First time seeing your world from above, Primitive," a voice asked. I turned to see one of the other guardsmen, a man named Cassian from our training company. He wasn't mocking, just curious. "Yes," I admitted. "In my homeland, we believed the world was flat. That if you sailed far enough, you would fall off the edge into an abyss." Cassian laughed, but not cruelly. "I grew up in the Underhive. Didn't even know there was a world beyond the city until they conscripted me. We're all primitives in our own way. You're just more honest about it." The Indomitable Will held 20,000 Imperial guardsmen from various regiments, along with their equipment, supplies, and support personnel. We were assigned to the 47th Valdris Mechanized Infantry, a regiment that had lost 70% of its strength in the previous campaign and needed fresh replacements. The veterans who remained looked at us new recruits with expressions that mixed pity and contempt. They had seen real combat. They knew what awaited us, and they knew most of us wouldn't survive it. The journey took 6 weeks. 6 weeks in the belly of that massive ship, confined to barracks that held 200 men in a space meant for comfort. We drilled constantly. Weapons training, physical conditioning, tactical exercises, religious observances. The commissars walked among us, watching for signs of weakness or heresy, ready to execute anyone who failed to meet Imperial standards. During this time, I learned more about what we were heading toward. The war we were being sent to fight was on a world called Cronus 4, in a neighboring sector. The planet had been invaded by what they called orcs, a xenos species that lived only to fight and conquer. The briefing showed images of these orcs, and I felt my blood run cold. They were massive creatures, easily twice the size of a large man, with green skin and jutting tusks. They carried crude but devastating weapons, massive guns that fired rockets, chain swords with spinning teeth, armor cobbled together from scrap metal that somehow worked despite looking like it shouldn't. "The Greenskins have taken the northern continent," the briefing officer explained. "Imperial forces are holding the equatorial cities, but we're losing ground. Your regiment will reinforce the defense of Hive Primus, prevent the Xenos from breaking through to the southern agricultural zones. If those zones fall, the planet cannot sustain its population, billions will starve. Billions. A number so vast I couldn't properly comprehend it. In my homeland, we measured populations in hundreds or at most thousands. The idea that billions of people depended on the outcome of this battle was overwhelming. How do we kill them? I asked. These orcs, what are their weaknesses? The briefing officer looked at me with something like approval. Good question, guardsman. Orcs are tough, can survive wounds that would kill humans, regenerate from injuries, keep fighting with limbs severed. But they're not invincible. Concentrated lasgun fire will bring them down. Explosives work well. And they're stupid, clever in brutish ways but not tactically sophisticated. Use that against them. We made landfall on Cronus 4 3 days later. The planet's sky was grey with smoke from burning cities. The air tasted of ash and chemicals. And the sound, even inside the transport we could hear it. A constant rumble of distant artillery, punctuated by louder explosions that shook the ground. This was war on a scale I couldn't have imagined. Not raids or battles between armies of thousands, but continent-spanning conflict involving millions of combatants fought with weapons that could level cities. We were deployed to a trench system on the outskirts of Hive Primus. Miles of fortifications, concrete bunkers, razor wire, minefields, gun emplacements, all designed to slow the orc advance. The trenches themselves were worse than any battlefield I had known. Knee-deep in mud that stank of human waste and decay, walls shored up with sandbags and corpses of the previously fallen, lit by harsh floodlights that turned night into perpetual dusk. We took our positions alongside veterans who had been holding this line for months. They looked hollowed out, surviving on stimulants and desperation. One of them, a corporal with a mechanical hand and burns covering half his face, gave us advice in a voice deadened by too much horror. Keep your heads down. Don't waste ammunition. When they charge, and they will charge, shoot the ones in front and let the ones behind trip over their corpses. Don't try to be heroes. Heroes die fast. You want to survive, you be cowards who kill efficiently. That night, huddled in a dugout with 5 of my warriors, I tried to process what we had gotten ourselves into. This wasn't like Viking raids where you hit a target, grabbed plunder and left. This was siege warfare, attrition, 2 massive forces grinding against each other until one broke. I miss the longship, Erica said quietly. Miss the sea. Miss knowing that if things went wrong, we could just sail away. There's no sailing away from this, Thorvald replied. We're here until we die, or until the Imperium decides the planet isn't worth holding. Then we make them decide it's worth holding, I said, trying to inject some confidence I didn't feel. We fight well. We survive. We prove that Vikings, even Vikings serving as Imperial guardsmen, are worth keeping alive. The orcs attacked at dawn. We heard them before we saw them. A roar that started distant and grew closer, the sound of millions of throats screaming for violence. Then we saw them, a green tide flowing across the wasteland between their lines and ours, thousands upon thousands of the massive creatures charging headlong into our defensive positions. First rank, fire! The sergeant screamed, and 200 lasguns opened up simultaneously. The flash of las fire lit the pre-dawn darkness like lightning. Orcs in the front ranks fell, burned through by focused fire, but more came behind them, trampling their own dead, firing crude weapons that sent rockets and bullets screaming into our trenches. Second rank, fire! More lasguns, more orcs falling, but they were so close now I could see their faces, brutal, eager, thrilled by the violence. They wanted this. They lived for this. Combat was their natural state, and they approached it with a joy that was terrifying to witness. Fix bayonets! The order came, and I snapped the blade onto my lasgun with movements made automatic by training. The orcs hit our lines like a tsunami of green flesh and crude metal. I shot one in the face from 3 paces away. Its head exploded, but its body kept coming, momentum carrying it forward until I sidestepped and let it crash into the trench wall behind me. Another came at me with a massive cleaver-like weapon. I shot it in the chest, once, twice, 3 times, before it finally went down. Then I was fighting hand to hand, bayonet and rifle used like a spear. all my Viking combat instincts coming back. Duck under a swing, thrust into the throat, pull back and shoot the next one. Use the corpse as a shield while you reload. Keep moving. Keep killing. Don't think about the screaming or the blood or the bodies piling up. The assault lasted maybe 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. Time became meaningless in the chaos. All that mattered was staying alive, keeping your weapon functional, killing anything green that came within reach. When it finally ended, when the orcs pulled back, leaving thousands of their dead carpeting the wasteland, I looked around at what remained of my position. Of the 20 guardsmen who had been in our section of trench, 8 were dead. Another 5 were wounded badly enough to require evacuation. 7 of us were combat effective. 7 out of 20, after a single engagement. I found Eric 2 positions over, his uniform soaked with blood. Not his own, thankfully. Thorvald was helping load wounded onto stretchers, his face expressionless with shock. 3 of my Vikings were dead, killed in their first real battle in this strange new war. "Is it always like this?" I asked the corporal with the mechanical hand. He was binding a wound on his arm, barely seeming to notice the pain. That was light probing. The real assaults are worse, much worse. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "You did well, though. Your people did well. Lots of first-timers freeze up or break. You kept fighting. That's good. We need fighters." The commissar came by an hour later, stepping over corpses as he inspected our position. He stopped in front of me, looking at the orc bodies piled where I had been fighting. "Guardsman Thane, isn't it? The primitive from the lost tribe?" "Yes, sir," I replied, standing at attention despite my exhaustion. 7 confirmed kills in your first engagement. Impressive. Your people have experience with close combat, I'm told. "Yes, sir. We raided extensively in our homeland. Close quarters fighting was common." The commissar nodded slowly. "That experience is valuable, extremely valuable. How many of your people survived the assault?" I did a quick count in my head. 13, sir. 3 dead from our original 16. Better survival rate than most first-timers. I'm attaching you and your Vikings to special operations. We need close assault specialists for trench clearing and bunker attacks. You'll receive additional training and better equipment. You'll also face higher casualty rates, but I suspect you're used to high-risk operations. "Yes, sir," I said, because what else could I say? We were being promoted, in a sense, given more dangerous work because we had proven we could handle it. It was a death sentence disguised as recognition, but it was also familiar territory. This was what Vikings did. High-risk assaults, boarding actions, desperate fights in confined spaces. If we were going to fight in this insane war, at least we would fight in ways that played to our strengths. The days that followed settled into a nightmarish routine. Hold the line during orc assaults. Conduct counterattacks to push them back from advanced positions. Clear trenches they had captured, fighting room to room, body to body, using bayonets and close-range lasgun fire in spaces too cramped for formation fighting. We learned the orcs' nature through constant exposure. They were savage, yes, but not mindless. They had their own crude tactics, using overwhelming numbers, concentrating force at weak points, using bigger orcs to lead charges. And they were terrifyingly resilient. I shot one orc 7 times center mass before it finally stayed down. But they were also predictable in certain ways. They always charged head-on, preferred close combat to ranged fighting, could be baited into traps by appearing weak. The Imperium had been fighting orcs for 10,000 years and had learned how to kill them efficiently. We were taught to aim for heads or to concentrate fire until even orc physiology couldn't regenerate. We learned to use grenades in confined spaces, to set ambushes in collapsed trenches, to work in small teams where our Viking coordination gave us advantages over standard guard tactics. My warriors adapted faster than I expected. Erica became a specialist with the meltergun, a weapon that fired beams of incredible heat, vaporizing anything they touched. Thorvald learned to operate a heavy bolter, a massive weapon that fired explosive rounds. Others found their niches in demolitions, field medicine, or sniper work. We were becoming the soldiers the Imperium needed, efficient killers who could survive in the meat grinder of modern warfare. But we were paying for that adaptation with pieces of ourselves. Every battle took something. Companions we had sailed with, laughed with, fought beside for years. Friends reduced to charred corpses or screaming wounded who had to be mercy killed because their injuries were too severe to survive. The camaraderie that had sustained us in our old life was eroding under the constant loss, and the psychological weight was crushing. This wasn't fighting for plunder or glory, or to defend our homes. This was fighting because the Imperium commanded it, on a world we had never heard of, against enemies we bore no personal grudge against, for strategic objectives we barely understood. We were cogs in a machine so vast that our deaths would be noted only as statistics in reports no one would read. And that knowledge, the absolute certainty that we didn't matter individually, that we were disposable resources in a war that would continue long after we were gone, was its own form of torture. I thought about the corporal's advice. Don't be heroes. Heroes die fast. Be cowards who kill efficiently. That was what we were becoming. Not the bold Viking raiders who had sailed into unknown waters seeking glory, but careful, efficient killers who survived by suppressing every instinct toward bravery or honor, by doing exactly what the Imperium needed and nothing more. We were 3 months into the campaign. 13 Vikings had become 9. The orcs kept coming, and the war showed no signs of ending. This was our life now. This was what serving the Imperium meant, fighting forever, dying slowly, becoming less human with each battle until nothing remained but the function of killing and the hope that maybe, somehow, we would survive one more day. Chapter 5. The Corruption of Honor. 6 months into the Cronus 4 campaign, the Commissar gave us an order that would change everything. We were to clear Trench 7 Alpha, a position the Orcs had captured 3 days earlier. Standard operation, except for one detail. There were Imperial survivors trapped inside, approximately 40 guardsmen cut off when the Orcs broke through. Your priority is eliminating the Xenos presence, Commissar Varland told us in the briefing. Rescue of surviving guardsmen is secondary. If evacuation proves impractical, you are authorized to grant the Emperor's mercy to wounded who cannot be extracted. Grant the Emperor's mercy, a euphemism for execution. We were being ordered to kill our own people if saving them was inconvenient. I looked at my remaining Vikings, now 8 after we lost Olaf to an orc bullet last week. Their faces showed the same conflict I felt. In our old life, we fought to protect our own. A warrior who abandoned his companions was the worst kind of coward, deserving only exile and shame. But we weren't Vikings anymore. We were Imperial guardsmen. And Imperial guardsmen followed orders. We moved out at dusk, 9 men carrying enough firepower to level a small building. Erica had his melter gun. Thorvald carried the heavy bolter. The rest of us had standard lasguns with extra power packs and grenades. We moved through no man's land using the craters and destroyed vehicles as cover, reaching the entrance to Trench 7 Alpha without encountering resistance. The trench was a charnel house. Bodies, both human and orc, lay in piles, rotting in the perpetual damp. The smell was overpowering, even through our rebreathers. Blood and worse covered every surface. We could hear the orcs ahead, their guttural voices echoing through the trench system. And underneath that, something else. Humans screaming. The survivors were still alive, and they were suffering. "Move carefully," I whispered in Norse, then in Gothic for the 2 non-Vikings who had been attached to our team. Orcs first, then we assessed the survivors. We advanced through the trench, clearing it section by section. The orcs we encountered were surprised. They hadn't expected an attack from this direction. We killed them efficiently, quietly when possible, using the close quarters tactics we had perfected over months of fighting. At the 3rd junction, we found the survivors. 40 guardsmen, the Commissar had said. There were maybe 20 still alive, huddled in a dugout that had partially collapsed. They were in terrible condition, wounded, starving, half mad with fear and pain. Several had been tortured by the orcs, their bodies bearing marks of brutal abuse. One of them, a sergeant with a shattered leg, grabbed my arm as I entered. "Thank the Emperor, thank the Emperor. We thought you weren't coming. We thought they'd leave us." "We're here," I said, kneeling beside him. "We've cleared the orcs from this section. Can you walk?" "Some of us, maybe half. The others..." He gestured to the back of the dugout where the most severely wounded lay. "They need medical attention. Real medical attention, not field patches." I looked at them. A man with his guts held in by bandages that wouldn't last another day. Another with burns covering 70% of his body, barely conscious and moaning in constant agony. A third missing both legs below the knee, the stumps crudely cauterized, showing signs of infection that would kill him within days. These men weren't going to make it. Not back through 200 meters of hostile trench, across no man's land under potential fire, to the medical stations in our lines. Moving them would kill them almost certainly, and attempting to move them would slow us down, endanger the rest of the survivors. The tactical calculation was clear. Leave them. Take those who could walk and leave the rest. But these were our people. Imperial guardsmen like us. Men who had fought and suffered and deserved better than to be abandoned in a hole in the ground. "Erica," I said quietly in Norse, "can we carry them? All of them?" He looked at the wounded, did the same calculation I had done. "Maybe, if we had stretchers and time and a clear route. We have none of those things, and the Commissar's orders were clear." "Fuck the Commissar's orders," I said, still in Norse so the survivors wouldn't understand. "We're Vikings. We don't abandon our own." "We're not Vikings anymore, Bjorn. We're Imperial guardsmen. We follow orders." He was right. I knew he was right. But accepting it meant accepting that we had become something I couldn't respect. Soldiers who valued efficiency over honor, who abandoned wounded comrades because it was tactically convenient. The sergeant was looking at me, understanding dawning in his eyes despite not speaking our language. "You're supposed to leave us, aren't you? The wounded. Orders?" I couldn't lie to him. "Yes, the priority is clearing the trench, not rescue. But you're not going to." It wasn't a question. He could see the conflict on my face. "You're thinking about trying to save all of us." "I'm thinking," I admitted, "that there has to be a way, that we can't just leave you." The sergeant laughed, a bitter sound. "I appreciate the sentiment, Primitive, but I've been a guardsman for 12 years. I know how the Imperium works. Efficiency over sentiment. Mission over mercy. You can save maybe 10 of us, those who can walk. Or you can try to save all of us and probably get everyone killed when the orcs counterattack. What's the logical choice? Put that way, it was obvious. Save who we could. Grant mercy to the rest. But mercy meant murder. Meant putting a laser gun to the head of suffering men and pulling the trigger because moving them was inconvenient. Meant becoming executioners of our own people in the name of tactical efficiency. I looked at Erica, at Thorvald, at the other Vikings. Saw my own conflict reflected in their faces. We had adapted to so much. The weapons, the language, the tactics, the sheer scale of Imperial warfare. But this? Could we adapt to this? "How many can walk?" I asked the sergeant. 11 of us, maybe 12 if we help the ones who are borderline. "Then we take 12. The others..." I couldn't finish the sentence. The sergeant nodded slowly. "I'll do it. I'm the ranking survivor. It's my responsibility. Just leave me a laser gun with a full charge. And give me 5 minutes with them first. They deserve to know." We withdrew to give him privacy. I could hear him talking to the dying men, his voice low and steady. Some of them cried. Some argued. Some accepted with the resignation of men who had always known the Imperium valued them only as resources. Then came the sounds I would hear in my nightmares for years after. 5 laser gun shots, quick and efficient. The Emperor's mercy, administered by a man who would have to live with what he had done for whatever remained of his life. The sergeant emerged from the dugout, his face expressionless. He handed me the laser gun. 11 now, let's move. We got them out. All 11 survivors, plus our assault team, made it back to Imperial lines. The Commissar commended us for a successful operation. Trench cleared, Survivors recovered, acceptable casualties. We were given extra rations and a day of rest as reward. But I couldn't enjoy it. Couldn't stop thinking about those 5 men we had left behind. Dead not from enemy action, but from our own calculated decision that saving them was more trouble than they were worth. That night, I gathered my remaining Vikings in a quiet corner of the trench. "We murdered those men," I said, bluntly. "Not directly, but we might as well have pulled the triggers ourselves." "They were dying anyway," Thorvald argued. "We couldn't save them. Moving them would have killed them and endangered everyone else." "Maybe, probably, but we didn't even try. We made the efficient choice, the Imperial choice. We valued mission success over honoring our obligations to fellow warriors." "Because we're not Vikings anymore," Erica said tiredly. We kept having this conversation, in different forms, every time something happened that challenged our old values. We're Imperial guardsmen. We follow Imperial logic. We make Imperial choices. And what happens when Imperial choices require us to kill civilians, to destroy cities, to commit atrocities because they're tactically sound? "Then we commit them," Erica replied, his voice hard. "Because we don't have a choice. Because the alternative is execution or worse. We gave up the right to make moral choices when we agreed to serve." Was that true? Had we lost even the capacity for moral judgment? Were we just mechanisms now, executing orders without consideration for right or wrong? I thought about the 5 men we had left to die, about the calculation that their lives were worth less than the convenience of an easy evacuation, about how normal that calculation had seemed, how little I had hesitated before accepting it. This was what serving the Imperium did to you, not just wearing you down physically, not just breaking your spirit through constant trauma, but corrupting your moral sense, teaching you to value efficiency over ethics, making you complicit in horrors you would once have fought against. We had been warriors who valued honor, courage, loyalty to companions. We were becoming soldiers who valued mission completion, casualty ratios, tactical advantage. The transformation wasn't complete yet. I could still feel guilt about those 5 dead men, could still recognize that we had done something wrong. But the guilt was getting easier to ignore, and eventually, I knew, it would fade entirely. Just like it had for all the other long-service guardsmen I had seen. The veterans with dead eyes who executed civilians suspected of harboring heretics without hesitation, who ordered artillery strikes on positions where Imperial troops were mixed with enemies because the tactical math worked out, who granted the Emperor's mercy routinely, efficiently, without emotional engagement. We were becoming them, one compromise at a time, one ugly choice at a time, one sacrifice of principle for practicality at a time. And there was nothing we could do to stop it. 2 weeks later, we were ordered to participate in a pacification action in one of the contested hive sectors. Orcs had infiltrated the civilian population, were hiding among non-combatants. Our orders were to clear the sector, eliminate all orc presence by any means necessary. Any means necessary. That phrase had become sickeningly familiar. It meant, don't worry about collateral damage, don't worry about civilian casualties, just complete the objective. We entered the hive sector with a full platoon, 100 guardsmen with heavy weapons and demolition charges. The civilians who remained were terrified, caught between orc brutality and Imperial efficiency. They begged us for help, for protection, for mercy. We gave them none. Anyone who couldn't immediately prove they weren't harboring orcs was a potential threat. Anyone who resisted our searches was executed as a probable collaborator. Anyone who ran was shot because only the guilty run. We found the orcs, a group of about 30 hiding in the lower levels. We killed them with grenades and meltagun fire, burning them out of their positions. But the orcs weren't the only casualties. The civilians living in that sector, maybe 300 of them, died in the crossfire, from collapsing buildings, from being in the wrong place when we decided to use demolition charges. 300 people, men, women, children. Imperial citizens who had done nothing wrong except have the misfortune of being where orcs chose to hide. And we killed them. Not intentionally, not gleefully, but we killed them nonetheless. Because any means necessary meant their lives didn't factor into our tactical calculations. Afterward, the commissar praised our efficiency. The sector was clear. The orcs were eliminated. Acceptable collateral damage. Mission accomplished. That night, I sat alone and tried to remember what it had felt like to be a Viking. To be part of a culture that valued honor and courage. That had rules. Brutal rules, but rules nonetheless, about how warriors should conduct themselves. I couldn't remember. That person was gone, eroded away by months of serving an empire that valued nothing except results. We were still alive. 8 Vikings out of the original 50 who had landed on Valdris Prime. Still fighting, still functioning, still executing orders efficiently. But we weren't warriors anymore. We were killers, tools, mechanisms for converting Imperial resources into enemy casualties, with no moral consideration beyond tactical efficiency. The torture wasn't physical, it was moral. Watching yourself become something you would once have despised, and being unable to stop the transformation because stopping meant death. And some part of you, some stubborn, cowardly part, still wanted to survive. Even if survival meant becoming a monster. Chapter 6. The Cost of Survival. A year into the Cronus 4 campaign, I stopped counting the dead. Not just the enemies we killed, those had become meaningless numbers long ago, but our own casualties, the Vikings, the guardsmen we fought beside, the civilians caught in the grinding machine of Imperial warfare. The numbers were too large, too constant, too meaningless. We were down to 6 now. 6 Vikings from the original 50. Halvard died in the first engagement. 3 more in the trench fighting. Olaf to a sniper. A dozen others to artillery, disease, accidents, exhaustion. The rest had been folded into our unit as we fought. Erika, Thorvald, Sigurd, Knut, Ragnar and myself. 6 men who still spoke Norse in private, who still remembered longships and raids, who carried memories of a world that seemed increasingly like a fever dream. The campaign was grinding toward a conclusion. The orcs were being pushed back, slowly and at horrific cost. For every kilometer of ground we reclaimed, we paid in thousands of lives. The mathematics of Imperial warfare were brutal but simple. Spend human lives until the enemy breaks, then spend more lives consolidating the victory, then move to the next war zone and repeat. We were stationed in what had once been a commercial district of Hive Primus, now reduced to rubble and used as a staging area for the final push. Tens of thousands of guardsmen massed in the ruins, preparing for the assault that would break the orc hold on the northern continent. I was a sergeant now, promoted after our previous sergeant died in the pacification action. Leadership based purely on survival. I had lasted longer than others. Therefore, I must know something about not dying. The logic was circular, but effective. I commanded a squad of 20 guardsmen, my 5 Viking brothers, plus 15 others, from various regiments, who had been folded together as their original units were destroyed. The new men looked at me with the same mix of respect and wariness that I had once shown to ancient veterans. I was only 33 years old, young by normal standards, but I had the eyes of someone much older. Eyes that had seen too much, that no longer reflected surprise or horror, just tired acceptance of whatever fresh hell the universe offered. Sergeant Thane, one of the new men, a boy named Petros who couldn't be more than 18, asked nervously, "Is it true you're from a world that didn't know about the Emperor, that you worshipped false gods?" The question was dangerous. Asking about someone's faith could be interpreted as questioning their loyalty, which could draw the commissar's attention. But Petros was genuinely curious, not accusatory. "I'm from a different world," I answered carefully. "Different culture, different understanding of the universe, but I serve the Emperor now, same as you." "Do you believe in him? Really believe?" Did I? That was a complicated question. I had learned to pray, to make the ritual gestures, to mouth the catechisms, I had seen enough of the Imperium's power to understand that the Emperor, whether god or man or something between, had created something that spanned the galaxy. But believe in the religious sense. Believe that he cared about me personally, that my service mattered to him, that I would be rewarded in death. No, I didn't believe that. The Emperor, if he noticed individual guardsmen at all, noticed us only as statistics, resources expended or conserved based on tactical necessity. I believe the Imperium needs to exist, I said finally. I've seen what's out there, the orcs, the things we don't talk about, the threats that would destroy humanity if we weren't organized and armed and willing to fight. So I believe in the necessity of Imperial service. Whether the Emperor is divine or just incredibly powerful, I shrugged. That's above my understanding. It wasn't the answer a good guardsman should give. A good guardsman would proclaim absolute faith without hesitation. But I was too tired to lie convincingly, and Petros seemed satisfied with the honesty. The assault was scheduled for dawn. We would be part of the third wave, following the initial assault to establish a beachhead, then pushing through to objectives deeper in Orc territory. It was a meat grinder operation, designed to overwhelm Orc positions through sheer weight of numbers. The night before, I gathered my Vikings for what might be our last conversation. We sat in a ruined building, sharing a bottle of Amasek that Canute had acquired through some trade I didn't ask about. The alcohol was harsh but welcome, burning away the constant fear for a few moments. "Do you think we'll ever see home again?" Sigurd asked. He was the youngest of us, only 27, and he still carried hope that the rest of us had lost. "No," I answered bluntly. "Home is 10,000 light years away. If it even exists in this galaxy, if the storm that brought us here wasn't something more complicated than weather, we'll die here, or on the next world, or the one after that, but we won't see our homeland again." "Then why do we keep fighting?" Ragnar demanded. "Why not just stop? Take a laser gun, point it up instead of forward, end it quickly." It was a question we had all considered. Suicide was technically heresy, but if you were careful, if you died in a way that looked like combat, no one would know. A moment of carelessness in battle, a failure to dodge, a charge that went too far. There were countless ways to die if you truly wanted to. "Because we're not done yet," Thorvald said before I could answer. "We're Vikings. We die in battle, yes, but in battle against enemies, fighting with courage, not by our own hand like cowards. If we're going to die, and we are, we die taking as many enemies with us as possible." "Is that enough?" Sigurd asked. "Just killing until we're killed? No greater purpose, no hope of anything beyond that?" "It has to be enough," I said, "because it's all we have. The Imperium offers no retirement, no peace, no reward except the privilege of continued service until we die. So we fight well, we protect the men beside us, and we make our deaths cost the enemy dearly. That's Viking honor, adapted to Imperial service. That's what we can control." We drank in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. Then Erica spoke, his voice quiet but determined. "I want to make a pact, all of us. We don't speak of home anymore. We don't remember the old gods or the old ways or who we used to be. We're Imperial guardsmen now. That's our entire identity, because holding on to what we were just makes it hurt more. Better to let it die completely, become fully what we need to be to survive." "You want us to forget?" Sigurd looked stricken. "Forget our families, our culture, everything that made us who we are. I want us to stop torturing ourselves with memories of things we can't return to," Erica corrected. "Every time we speak Norse, every time we remember raiding or sailing or worshipping the Allfather, we're reminding ourselves of what we've lost. It's like picking at a wound that won't heal. Better to let it scar over completely." I understood what he was saying. The memories were a burden, a weight that made each day harder. If we could let them go, truly let them go, not just suppress them, maybe we could find some peace in our new existence. But I also understood what we would be giving up. Our memories were the last thing that made us unique, the last evidence that we had been more than just Imperial property. If we erased them, we would become exactly what the Imperium wanted. Interchangeable soldiers with no identity beyond our function. No, I said finally. We keep the memories. We speak Norse when we can. We remember who we were. Not because it makes survival easier, but because it's all we have left that's truly ours. The Imperium owns our bodies, our service, our futures. But our past, our memories, those are still ours, and I won't give them up. Thorvald nodded agreement. Ragnar and Knut as well. Erika looked like he wanted to argue, but ultimately said nothing. Sigurd just looked relieved that we weren't cutting ourselves off from the last remnant of our old lives. We finished the bottle and tried to sleep, knowing that dawn would bring another battle, another chance to die, another day of being exactly what we had become, survivors in a war that would never end. The assault began with an artillery barrage that lasted 3 hours, thousands of guns firing simultaneously, turning the orc positions into a hell of explosions and shrapnel. We waited in our trenches, the ground shaking beneath us, praying to whatever gods we believed in that the bombardment would soften the enemy enough that we might survive what came next. Then the whistle blew, and we went over the top. I had participated in dozens of assaults by this point, but the scale of this one was unprecedented. 50,000 guardsmen advancing simultaneously across a 5-kilometer front. A human tsunami meant to overwhelm whatever remained of the orc positions. The orcs were waiting. Despite the artillery, despite the bombardment, they were still there in terrifying numbers. And they were eager for this fight, charging to meet us with a joy that was alien and horrifying. The first few minutes were chaos. Lasfire and orc shooters creating a curtain of death between the two armies. Men falling by the hundreds, cut down before they made it halfway across no man's land. Screaming and explosions and the peculiar smell of burned flesh that I had long ago learned to ignore. We made it to their first trench line and went over, dropping into close quarters combat where our Viking experience was most valuable. Bayonets and rifle butts and knives, fighting in spaces too cramped for proper tactics. Just survival instinct and willingness to be more brutal than the enemy. I killed an orc with my bayonet through its eye, shot another in the throat, used my laser gun to block a cleaver that would have taken my head off, kicked the orc in the knee and finished it while it was down. Keep moving, keep killing, keep advancing. Erika was beside me, his meltergun turning orcs to ash, creating a path through their position. Thorvald's heavy bolter was a constant thunder, each explosion removing chunks of enemy. The rest of my squad was scattered but fighting, doing what they had been trained to do. We took the first trench, then the second, then a fortified position that should have stopped us but didn't, because we threw enough bodies at it that eventually the orcs ran out of ammunition, and we overran them in hand-to-hand combat. By midday, we had advanced 3 kilometers. By sunset, 5 kilometers. The casualties were horrific. Estimates said we had lost 20,000 guardsmen in the assault, but the orcs had lost more. Their lines were breaking. The campaign was ending. 3 days later, the orc resistance collapsed completely. The survivors fled into the wilderness, hunted by Imperial forces, no longer a coherent threat. Cronus IV was secured. We had won. The cost? Approximately 140,000 Imperial casualties over 15 months of fighting. Billions in equipment and resources. An entire continent reduced to wasteland that would take decades to reclaim. But we had won. The planet was Imperial again. The strategic objectives were achieved. By the Imperium's mathematics, it was a successful campaign. I stood in the ruins of what had once been an orc command center, looking out at the devastation, and tried to feel something about the victory. Pride, maybe, satisfaction, relief that it was over. I felt nothing, just the same emptiness that had become my constant companion. We had won this war. Soon we would be shipped to another war zone to fight another war. The cycle would continue until we died or until we became too damaged to be useful. Of my squad of 20, 12 had survived the final assault. Of my Vikings, all 6 of us were still alive, battered, wounded, but functional. Against all probability, we had survived. But survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like a temporary stay of execution. Like we had been granted a few more months or years of service before the inevitable end caught up with us. "Sergeant Thane," a runner approached, saluting. "Orders from command. Your squad is being transferred to the Endless Duty for transport to the next deployment. You have 6 hours to prepare." "Where are we being sent?" I asked, though I knew the answer didn't really matter. "Classified, Sergeant. You'll be briefed during transit." Of course. Another world, another war, another chance to die for objectives we wouldn't understand in service to an Imperium that would forget us the moment we were gone. I gathered my men, the 12 survivors of countless battles, the 6 Vikings who had sailed into this nightmare with me, and gave them the news. Some looked resigned, some looked relieved that at least they would be leaving this hell world. None looked happy. This was our life now. This was what we had become. Not warriors seeking glory or raiders seeking plunder, but efficient killers moved from battlefield to battlefield until we wore out. The cost of survival was everything we had been, and the reward for survival was just more of the same, forever, until we finally failed to survive. We boarded the transport ship the next morning, leaving Cronus 4 behind. The planet was already being rebuilt, new colonists arriving to replace the dead, the war becoming history even as we departed. I took one last look at the world where I had learned what it truly meant to serve the Imperium, where I had been transformed from a Viking warrior into an Imperial guardsman, where I had lost 44 companions and whatever remained of my innocence. Then I turned away and moved deeper into the ship toward whatever fresh horror awaited us next. Because that's what we did. We survived, and we continued, and we fought. Forever. Chapter 7. What Remains of Vikings. The Endless Duty carried us through the warp for 6 weeks. 6 weeks in the belly of a ship that groaned and shuddered as it traveled through a dimension that the Imperials called hell, and meant it literally. We were confined to our barracks, forbidden from moving through the ship during warp transit, listening to sounds that sometimes seemed to form words in languages we didn't know. The new men in my squad, the ones who had joined us after Cronus, dealt with warp travel poorly. Petros had nightmares every time he slept, waking up screaming about things that pursued him. 2 others developed nervous tics, constantly looking over their shoulders at nothing. One tried to claw his own eyes out and had to be sedated and restrained. Warp madness, Thorvald explained to them, in the detached tone we had all developed. Happens on long transits. The barrier between reality and the immaterium is thin on these ships. Sometimes things leak through, thoughts, presences, influences. You either learn to ignore them or they drive you insane. How do you ignore them? Petros asked, his voice trembling. How do you sleep when you can hear whispering that promises terrible things? You realize that terrible things are going to happen whether you hear whispers or not, I said. The universe is hostile. The warp, the Xenos, our own commanders. Everything is trying to kill us. The whispers are just more honest about it, so you accept that you're probably going to die horribly, and then you stop caring about whispers. It wasn't comforting advice, but it was honest, and honesty was all I had left to offer. During the transit, I tried to calculate how long we had been serving the Imperium. 2 years? 3? Time was difficult to track when you were constantly moving between worlds. When each campaign blurred into the next. When the only markers were which of your companions had died most recently. I was 35 years old now, should have been in my prime as a Viking warrior, raiding wealthy monasteries and earning glory. Instead, I was a worn-out Imperial sergeant who had killed more people than he could count and forgotten most of their faces. The Vikings gathered in a corner of the barracks one evening, speaking quietly in Norse about things we couldn't discuss in Gothic. It had become our ritual, maintaining our language, keeping alive the last connections to who we had been. I can't remember my father's face anymore, Sigurd admitted. I know he existed. I know we went on raids together, but when I try to picture him, there's just nothing. Like he's been erased. Same with my wife, Knut said. I know I loved her. I know we had children, but the emotions are gone. I remember the facts, but not the feelings. This was happening to all of us. The human brain wasn't designed to function under constant trauma. It adapted by suppressing memories that interfered with survival, by cutting off emotional responses that might slow combat reflexes, by gradually erasing everything except the immediate needs of staying alive and following orders. We were losing our pasts even as we tried to maintain them. The very act of survival was destroying the memories we were trying to preserve. Maybe Erica was right, Ragnar said quietly. Maybe we should let it go, stop trying to remember what we were, accept what we've become. And what have we become? I asked. Survivors, killers, Imperial guardsmen, men who are very, very good at not dying. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be enough. I wanted to argue, but I wasn't sure what I would argue for. That we should cling to memories that were fading anyway, that we should maintain an identity that had already been mostly erased, that there was honor in remembering who we used to be even as we did things our former selves would have found shameful. We're not Vikings anymore, Thorvald said, giving voice to what we all knew. We haven't been for a long time. We're something else now. Something that started as Vikings but has been transformed by Imperial service into whatever this is. Then what are we? Sigurd asked. Useful, Erica said simply. We're useful to the Imperium. We fight well. We survive when others don't. We complete missions. That's our identity now. Not our past, not our culture, not our beliefs. Just our function. The conversation died after that. Because he was right and we all knew it. We had been refined by years of service into efficient killing machines that happened to still be conscious. Our Viking heritage was just a curiosity now, a quirk that made us slightly different from other guardsmen, but didn't change what we fundamentally were. Weapons in human form. We made planetfall on our new assignment 2 days later. The world was called Gehenna 4, and it was a death world, a planet where the environment itself was actively hostile to human life. The native flora was poisonous, the fauna was predatory and aggressive, and the human colonists lived in fortified compounds that they rarely left. The enemy was a chaos cult that had arisen among the mining operations in the southern hemisphere. They had to be purged before their corruption spread to the rest of the planet's population. This is a cleansing operation, the briefing officer explained. Zero tolerance for corruption. If you can't confirm someone is clean, assume they're tainted and act accordingly. The Emperor protects, but he expects us to protect ourselves by being thorough. Zero tolerance. Assume guilt. Be thorough. More euphemisms for mass murder. We deployed to the mining region with a full regiment, 5,000 guardsmen tasked with cleansing an area that held approximately 50,000 civilians. The mathematics were obvious. We expected to kill far more civilians than actual cultists. That was acceptable in Imperial calculations. Better to kill 1,000 innocents than let one cultist escape to spread corruption. The operation began at dawn. We went settlement by settlement using cogitators to scan for chaos taint, interrogating anyone who showed even slight signs of corruption, executing those who failed the tests or resisted questioning. Most of the miners were guilty of nothing except working in terrible conditions for minimal pay, but many showed low-level warp exposure. Not surprising given they worked deep underground where the barrier to the Imperium was thinner. That exposure was enough to condemn them. I watched my men, good soldiers who followed orders, execute families because their children showed signs of mutation that might have been chaos taint or might have been natural variation. Saw them burn habitation blocks because someone inside had chaos symbols that might have been worship or might have been ignorance about what the symbols meant. And I did nothing to stop it. Because these were our orders. Because the Imperium's logic said that thoroughness prevented worse outcomes later. Because I had stopped believing that individual lives mattered compared to strategic objectives. This was what we had become. Not warriors who fought enemies in honest combat, but executioners who killed anyone designated as threats by authorities. We never questioned. On the third day of the operation, we entered a hab block and found a family hiding in the basement. A father, mother, and 2 children, maybe 8 and 10 years old. They were terrified, begging for mercy in Gothic mixed with local dialect. The cogitator scan showed minor warp taint, not significant, not clearly indicative of active cult participation, but present, and our orders were zero tolerance. Execute them, I heard myself say. My voice was flat, emotionless, delivering the order as casually as I might request ammunition resupply. One of my new men, Petros, the boy who had asked about my faith, looked at me with horror. Sergeant, they're children. They haven't done anything. The taint is minor. Couldn't we? Execute them, I repeated. Those are our orders. Warp taint is warp taint. Age is irrelevant. I can't. Sergeant, please, they're just kids. I drew my last pistol and shot the father through the head. Then the mother. Then, while Petros stood frozen in horror, I shot the children. 4 quick executions, efficient and thorough, exactly as Imperial doctrine required. Petros vomited. Another soldier, a veteran who had been with us since Cronus, just nodded approval. The rest of my squad stood silent, processing what they had just witnessed. This is what service requires, I said, holstering my pistol. This is what we do. You execute orders without hesitation, without emotional interference, without allowing sympathy to compromise the mission. Understood? Yes, Sergeant, they replied in unison. Even Petros, though his voice shook. That night, I sat alone and tried to feel something about what I had done, tried to access guilt or horror or remorse, but there was nothing, just the same emptiness that had become my default state. I had murdered children, not in the heat of battle, not in self-defense, but in cold blood because a machine said they showed signs of corruption, and I felt nothing about it, except a vague satisfaction that I had followed orders correctly. This was the end point of the transformation. This was what serving the Imperium forever did to you. It didn't just erase your past, or corrupt your honor, or force you to make difficult choices. It erased your capacity for moral judgment entirely, leaving only the function of following orders and killing efficiently. Erica found me in my quarters. He had been leading another squad through a different sector and had similar stories. Civilians executed, families burned, entire settlements razed because they showed statistical likelihood of corruption. Do you remember, he asked in Norse, when we raided that monastery in Lindisfarne, how we justified it by saying the monks were wealthy, that they didn't need all that gold, that we were taking what we had earned through strength? I remember, I said, though the memory felt distant, like it had happened to someone else. We were lying to ourselves. We were just thieves and murderers who wanted gold and didn't care about the consequences. But at least we knew it. At least we didn't pretend we were righteous. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. The Imperium does the same things we did. Raids, murders, theft. But it calls them holy, calls them necessary. Makes us believe we're serving something greater when we're really just being Vikings on a galactic scale. Stealing, killing, destroying, but with better weapons and better justifications. Are you saying the Imperium is wrong? I asked carefully. Such thoughts bordered on heresy. No, I'm saying the Imperium is honest in its way. It doesn't pretend to be kind or merciful. It says explicitly that individuals don't matter, that efficiency is more important than morality, that service requires becoming something monstrous. We're just Vikings who finally met something bigger and more brutal than we were, and instead of fighting it, we joined it. He was right. The Imperium was Vikings writ large, a raiding culture that had grown to galactic scale, that took what it wanted and killed anyone who resisted, that justified its brutality through appeals to necessity and survival. We had been absorbed by something that operated on our old principles, but with infinitely more power and scope. So, what does that make us? I asked. Hypocrites who pretend we had honor when we were really just smaller monsters serving ourselves. Now we're larger monsters serving the Imperium. But we're still monsters. We always were. The rest of the campaign took 3 weeks. By the end, we had killed approximately 37,000 people. Some were genuinely cultists who worshipped chaos and needed to die. Most were just people who had the misfortune of living where corruption had taken root, killed because the Imperium's calculus said thorough purging was more efficient than selective elimination. Of my original squad of 20, 15 survived. Of the 6 Vikings, all 6 remained alive, still beating the odds through some combination of skill, luck, and the cold efficiency we had developed. We boarded the transport for our next assignment. Leaving Gehenna 4 to its surviving population, the planet would recover eventually. New miners would be brought in, the dead would be forgotten, and the Imperium would continue, grinding forward through countless small horrors like this one. I sat in my bunk and opened my journal, something I still maintained despite increasing doubt about its purpose. I made an entry. What remains of Vikings? Nothing. We were raiders who prided ourselves on courage and strength. Now we're executioners who kill the weak because we're ordered to. We spoke of honor. Now we murder children and feel nothing. We worship gods of battle and glory. Now we serve an empire of bureaucracy and efficiency. The Vikings are dead. What remains is just Imperial guardsmen who happen to remember being something else. And soon, even those memories will fade. Then there will be nothing left except the function of killing until we're killed. That is what serving the Imperium forever means. Total erasure, total transformation, total submission. And we call it duty. I closed the journal and tried to sleep, knowing that nightmares, if they came, would be indistinguishable from memory. Chapter 8. The end of the long journey, 5 years after landing on Valdris Prime, I stood on the bridge of a warship watching orbital bombardment reduce a city to slag. We were in the Ultima Segmentum, fighting against a Xenos species I had never heard of before this deployment. The city below had been their capital. Now it was a crater that glowed red from the heat of concentrated laser. Fire. 300,000 Xenos dead in 15 minutes. Efficient, thorough, exactly what Imperial doctrine required. I felt nothing watching it happen. No triumph at our victory, no horror at the scale of destruction, just the same hollow numbness that had become my permanent state. Of my original 50 Vikings, only 4 remained. Erika, Thorvald, Knut, and myself. Sigurd had died on Gehenna 4, caught by a cultist's improvised explosive. Ragnar had succumbed to infection after a wound turned septic, on a world whose name I couldn't remember. 2 men out of 50, still alive, after 5 years of continuous warfare. The mathematics were clear. We would all die eventually. We had simply managed to postpone the inevitable longer than most. Sergeant Thane, the ship's commissar addressed me. Your squad has been selected for a special operation, a deep strike against the Xenos command structure. High risk, high value target. You and your Vikings have the experience for this kind of mission. Understood, sir, I replied automatically. No questions about the objective, the odds, the expected casualties. Just acceptance and preparation to execute orders. This was what we had become. Perfect Imperial guardsmen. We followed orders without question, fought without fear, killed without remorse. The transformation was complete. The Vikings had been thoroughly erased, replaced by efficient mechanisms for converting Imperial resources into enemy casualties. We deployed that night. 4 Vikings and 12 other guardsmen from various regiments, all selected for their survival records. We were the ones who had lasted long enough to become useful specialists. Expensive investments that the Imperium would risk only when the objective justified potential loss. The insertion was a nightmare. Drop pods fired from orbit, punching through atmosphere at speeds that should have killed us, cushioned by systems we didn't understand, landing in hostile territory with nothing except the weapons we carried and the orders we had memorized. The Xenos were waiting. They had detected our approach, had prepared ambushes, had turned the landing zone into a kill box. We fought our way clear, leaving half our number dead in the first 30 minutes, advancing toward the objective because that was what we did. The Xenos were different from orcs, smaller, faster, more tactical. They used cover effectively, coordinated their attacks, adapted to our movements. Fighting them required all the experience we had accumulated across 5 years of warfare. We reached the objective, a command facility built into the side of a cliff, heavily fortified, defended by hundreds of Xenos warriors. Our orders were to plant demolition charges on its power core, destroy it, and extract if possible. Extract if possible. The usual euphemism for, we don't expect you to survive, but if you do, we'll try to pick you up. We fought our way inside using breaching charges and concentrated fire. Knut died in the entrance, his body torn apart by Xenos weapons that fired crystalline projectiles. 8 of us left now, pushing deeper into the facility, following directions from a data slate that showed architectural schematics. The Xenos command was in the central chamber, a dozen of them, taller and more heavily armored than the warriors we had fought. They didn't run, they stood their ground, fighting with the desperate courage of beings defending something that mattered. I killed 3 of them myself. Erika's meltagun accounted for 5 more. The rest died to concentrated laser fire and grenades. Then we were in the core chamber, placing charges on the power conduits, setting timers, preparing to run. Sergeant, one of the surviving guardsmen shouted. We've got incoming! Hundreds of them! We're not making it out. I looked at the charges, looked at my remaining men. 7 now, 1 having died in the command chamber. Looked at the corridor filling with Xenos warriors who would reach us before we could fight our way clear. Get to the extraction point, I ordered. I'll delay them. Sergeant, that's suicide. That's an order. Move. They moved. Imperial conditioning ran deep. When a superior gives orders, you follow them. They ran for the exit, while I positioned myself in a choke point, laser gun ready, spare power packs stacked beside me. "Bjorn," Erica called back, using my actual name for the first time in years. "You don't have to do this. We can fight our way out together." "No, we can't. And it doesn't matter. I'm tired, Erica. Tired of fighting. Tired of surviving. This is a good death. Go." He hesitated, then nodded. Thorvald clasped my shoulder as he passed, a gesture of respect between warriors. Then they were gone, and I was alone. The Xenos came in a wave. I fired methodically, each shot calculated to kill or wound. The choke point forced them to bunch up, made them easy targets. I dropped dozens before they finally reached me. Then it was hand-to-hand combat. My laser gun used as a club and spear, a combat knife in my other hand, fighting with every technique I had learned across 5 years of warfare and 37 years of life. Fighting with the skill that had kept me alive longer than I had any right to expect. I don't know how many I killed. Eventually they brought me down through sheer numbers. A blade through my side, another in my shoulder, being dragged down under a pile of Xenos bodies, stabbed and beaten and dying. The charges detonated, the facility collapsed, and I died in the explosion, crushed under tons of rock and burning metal, achieving the objective and ending my service simultaneously. It should have been the end, but it wasn't. Epilogue. The price of useful deathy, woke in a medical facility aboard the same warship we had deployed from. My body was a mass of new wounds and old repairs, augmatic replacements for destroyed organs, synthetic skin covering burns, metal pins holding shattered bones together. I had survived. Again. "Sergeant Thane," the Medicae tech said with professional detachment, "you've been unconscious for 3 weeks. Your injuries were extensive but repairable. You're being returned to active duty once rehabilitation is complete. The others?" I croaked through a reconstructed throat. "Sergeant Erica and 3 others from your squad survived extraction. They're assigned to new units. You'll be assigned to a new squad as well once you're cleared for duty." I had tried to die, had made what should have been a final stand, a good death defending my comrades, and the Imperium had repaired me, rebuilt me, prepared me for more service because I was useful. Too experienced to waste, too skilled to let die when I could be salvaged and return to function. This was the real horror of serving the Imperium forever. Not that they would work you to death, but that they wouldn't let you die. They would keep repairing you, replacing failing parts with augmetics, maintaining you like a piece of equipment because you were too valuable to lose. I was going to serve forever, not metaphorically but literally, until age or injury or accumulated damage finally exceeded the Imperium's ability or willingness to repair me, which, given their technology and my proven track record, might be decades from now. I was 37 years old. I would probably serve until I was 70 or 90 or 100, kept alive through augmentation and rejuvenate treatments, fighting battle after battle, war after war, watching everyone I knew die while I continued. This was what happened to Vikings who landed on a 40K world. Not dramatic death in glorious battle, but slow transformation into something that couldn't die, couldn't stop serving, couldn't do anything except continue until the machinery finally broke down completely. I thought about the young warrior I had been, sailing west in search of glory and plunder, thought about the longship and my brothers and my homeland, tried to remember what it had felt like to be free, to choose my own path, to believe that courage and strength could shape your destiny. Those memories were fading. Soon they would be gone entirely, and I would be just another ancient veteran with dead eyes and countless augmetics, serving efficiently until I finally wore out. The torture wasn't in serving. It was in surviving, in being kept alive past the point where death would have been mercy. In becoming so useful that the Imperium would never let you go. I am Sergeant Bjorn Thane of the Imperial Guard. I am a Viking who made the mistake of landing on a world in the 41st millennium. I have served for 5 years and will serve for decades more. And there is no escape except to become so broken that even the Imperium's machinery can't repair me. Until then, I serve. I fight, I survive, forever.